Arguably 2013's most anticipated game is finally upon us, that game being Bioshock Infinite. The original Bioshock revolutionized gaming with its unique atmospheric-based storytelling, along with having a mind-blowing plot twist towards its finale. While Bioshock got a sequel a few years back that was adequate, Infinite is the game that got fans wishful. Wishful that Infinite could live up to the ridiculously high standards set by the first Bioshock, along with being able to recreate the magic gamers experienced during their first playthrough into the dark, twisted depths of the underwater city of Rapture. Irrational Games in this new game set their sights to new heights, quite literally, seeing as this time around players explore a new city placed in the sky, known as Columbia. I myself was skeptical on whether or not a change in scenery would be enough to top its predecessor. Now, having completed the game, I find my skepticism surrounding this game to have been wrongly placed. Because not only did they manage to recapture the magic, somehow they managed to completely blow the original Bioshock off its pedestal. This is managed through some of the best storytelling I've ever seen done in a video game, accompanied with a more refined yet similar combat system. Story undeniably is Infinite's strongest quality. I really want to delve into all the things that make the plot so intriguing, but that would involve spoilers, so instead I will simply give a summary of the basic plot. You play as Booker DeWitt, a roguish man with a mysterious past. All the player really knows from the get-go is that DeWitt gambled his way into a very generous debt. One that is promised to be paid should he travel to Columbia, retrieve the girl Elizabeth, and bring her to the man who hired him. It becomes obvious early on that Booker is a hardened man, one who has seen and done more than any man should in a lifetime. Basically, he's got a lot of baggage, but more or less he has come to terms with the man he is. His mind is hardwired to completing his mission and showing no remorse, or at least that was his plan prior to meeting Elizabeth, who he fairly quickly develops a soft spot for. Elizabeth, the girl Booker is hired to retrieve, has spent her entire life locked away in a tower by her father, Comstock. We'll get to him later. Her only company being the Songbird, basically a very large robotic-like bird, who acts as her friend as well as her warden. Naturally, Elizabeth feels very cooped up and aspires of being free and traveling to Paris, of all places. Obviously, being trapped in a tower day in and day out, Elizabeth has had a lot of free time, which she claims is the reason for her being able to create tears in the universe. A tear, essentially, is a matter in a specific area being ripped apart, revealing a gateway into another world, one that is both similar yet different to the one they're currently in. The dynamic between Elizabeth and Booker is an interesting one. On one hand, you've got Booker, a tortured man who understands the necessity of killing under given circumstances. Then on the other, you've got Elizabeth, who has been shielded from the darkness in the world, and still clings to hope. As the game progresses, you see the two of them beginning to learn from each other, grow, and begin to become loyal to one another. Elizabeth gives Booker something to care for again, and she realizes the world isn't as it seems in the hundreds of books she's read. Comstock is the main antagonist in this game. He is the prophet, the founder of Columbia. To the people, he is their savior, their leader, and they would follow him to the end of the world. He picked up the name Prophet because he is credited with being able to see the future. He foretold the coming of a false prophet, who would be identified by the marking of the letters AD on his hand. A man who would lead the Lamb astray from her destiny of taking Comstock's place as leader after his demise. If you hadn't pieced this together yet, Booker is the false prophet, which is why everyone and their brother is trying to kill him, and Elizabeth is the Lamb. The story is told primarily through simply playing the game and seeing everything for yourself, but there is the occasional cutscene. Cutscenes in this game are all in-game and have the same quality of graphics as the gameplay itself. The cutscenes are scripted, but generally the player still has control of looking around, and occasionally further interaction is necessary. Voice acting in this game is top-notch. To be honest, it doesn't get much better than this. Particularly, Courtney Draper, who voices Elizabeth. She really brings Elizabeth to life, delivering loads of emotion, and her performance never falters. Elizabeth is further brought to life through some very realistic-looking facial animations. Just like the original Bioshock, this game has one of those wow moments woven into the game's plot where everything comes together. When I was getting close to the end, I wondered, how could they possibly tie everything together in a satisfactory way? I knew something had to happen, yet I was still surprised when it did. Talk about some awesome plot twists. The game's finale was well above my expectations. It's one of those endings that leave you thinking and will remain memorable for years to come. Take note that there is a little extra scene at the end of the credits, so be sure to stick around for that. Infinite is absolutely gorgeous to behold. It remains true to the art style of previous Bioshock games, but due to the new setting, the color palette has changed drastically. Columbia offers just as much atmosphere as Rapture did, if not more. In the beginning, before being exposed as the false prophet, the streets of Columbia were bustling with people to watch and eavesdrop on all their amusing conversations. Even after being known as the false prophet, there are still areas where the player can see NPCs going about their daily routines and such. Instead of waiting for trains like we do in our world, in Columbia the citizens have to wait for different segments of the city to connect and allow for people to cross, seeing as the city is suspended in individual bits. The return of audio diaries, along with other forms of media, further assist in bringing the world of Columbia to life. Audio diaries allow the player some extra information, most of the time relating to the game's plot, but also offer a personal perspective into different characters' opinions and motives. The audio diaries are collectibles that are actually worth picking up, just for the extra backstory they offer. Listening to them is convenient now, seeing as with a simple tap of the D-pad, it will automatically begin playing your last audio diary picked up. The game is set up very similarly to past entries. Technically the game is linear, but the levels are expansive along with all being a part of the one city. Due to these expansive areas, there is plenty of exploration offered for the player, which teases the player into feeling like the game is open world even though it's not actually a truly open world game. There are different districts in the city, and typically when traveling between these districts, the landscape changes quite a bit. These different districts could be seen as level changes. For anyone confused as where to go, players can activate a waypoint that points them in the direction of their current objective. This is a handy little addition, although it's not nearly as perfectly implemented such as the one in the Dead Space series. At times, the waypoint acts a little glitchy, along with only appearing for a few brief seconds, and offering only a vague direction opposed to an exact one. This is a minor complaint because it does its job well enough. The core Infinite gameplay is almost identical to that of previous Bioshock games. Instead of changing what worked well, they decided to just add on to the existing structure. This time around, instead of using plasmids, the player is granted with vigors. Vigors function the same as plasmids did. There are 8 vigors given to the player slowly throughout the course of the game. Each vigor is completely original, even if some have similarities to past plasmids. My personal favorite vigor is called Return to Cinder. It acts as both a defensive and offensive move. It allows the player to absorb bullets shot at him with the palm of his hand and then shoot the bullets back towards his enemies. The player can swap between a maximum of 2 equipped vigors with the tap of the left bumper. I thought it was kind of weird to only allow 2 vigors to be equipped at a time. I would have thought 4 or so would have been ideal. Not that it's a huge deal, because swapping vigors in and out of the slots is pretty quick and simple. All one has to do is hold the left bumper and use the right stick to put a new vigor into the selected slot. But I still found my constant need to swap vigors kind of a nuisance, because each time I did, it took me out of the natural flow of combat. I experienced a similar complaint when it came to weapons. Just like vigors, only 2 weapons can be equipped at a time. There is a large variety of different weapons in this game. I was actually rather impressed with how many the developers decided to incorporate. You've got multiple machine guns, shotguns, carbines, a chain gun, rocket launcher, type of grenade launcher, sniper rifle, etc. Unlike the vigors though, you are unable to carry every type of weapon with you and manually swap between them. Instead, it functions like your typical first-person shooter. You must swap weapons out as you find them on the map. I think it would have been ideal if I could have at least carried 3 weapons with me at a time, but since first-person shooters rarely allow more than 2 weapons to be equipped at a time, I can't really complain. I just feel that if I could have had more weapons at my disposal at all times, I would have been able to feel better equipped, and this would have allowed me to chain weapon kills together. There were tons of areas in this game where I would initiate a battle, realize that I really wish I wouldn't have traded out my sniper, or man, I could really use a carbine right about now. I feel that if the developers would have allowed a weapon wheel, accessible at any time for weapons you've picked up already, one that functions how the vigor wheel does, then the combat would have benefited from it, along with preventing some annoying deaths where I couldn't find a new weapon and had low ammo on all my currently equipped weapons. For the most part though, there are plenty of weapons found around the battlegrounds. And some of the time the developers tried to place weapons that the player might find advantageous against the upcoming battle. There are some very smart additions added into the gameplay that truly help in making the combat more intense and fun. The best of these additions is how Elizabeth is handled during the gameplay. Elizabeth, despite being gorgeous, knows how to take care of herself. She will accompany you through the game's entirety, minus the times where the two of you become separated. Elizabeth sets a new standard for companion AI. Most companion AIs hinder the player more than aid. It typically will get in the way. Elizabeth, on the other hand, is the complete opposite. She truly fulfills every promise one hears when developers talk about how awesome their companion AI are. She will throw you ammo, health, money, and salts. Salts are used up when performing vigors. Think of them as your mana. She also picked up the art of lockpicking from her years of solitude in the tower. Along with all of this, she will point things out for you, collectibles and such that you may have otherwise missed. As I mentioned, she is not helpless. You don't have to protect her, and you don't have to help her across areas. She will follow you wherever you go. Generally, when it comes to female companions, they need a lot of help crossing gaps and whatnot. With Elizabeth, this is not the case at all. The best part of Elizabeth is somehow, despite always being by your side, she never manages to get in your way. Plus, since she is your trusty companion, there is plenty of emotional chatter and bantering between her and Booker. Possibly the most unique thing regarding Elizabeth is her ability to open tears up for you during combat. These tears range from giving you cover to granting you friendly turrets. This extra little add-on is yet another thing that makes the combat so engaging. The only thing that some people may find annoying is Elizabeth seems to only be able to open up one tear at a time. But I suppose it would be unfair for the enemies if she could open all the tears at once. Another clever addition was that of sky rails. Sky rails are used as a form of transportation across all of Columbia. Early on, Booker is given a device that attaches to his hand which allows him to hook onto these sky rails. While hooked on, the player can dictate how fast or slow Booker grinds along. While this feature functions as a means of transport, it can also be utilized during combat. The player can shoot from these rails and also perform an attack where, when aimed at an enemy whilst within range, can jump off and perform an execution on said enemy that sends them soaring through the air. Booker's nifty little gadget also acts as your melee attack and can be activated with the Y button. When enemies are low on health, the player can hold this button to activate one of many gruesome executions. Perhaps the past Bioshock's most unique quality was the brilliance behind the Big Daddy and Little Sister dynamic. Personally, I adored the relationship between the two. Slightly underwhelming is the replacement of the Big Daddy in this game. In this game, the Handyman acts as the substitution. While the Handyman lacks the intrigue and emotional impact created by Big Daddies and Little Sisters, he makes up for it in combat. Fighting him is both intense and challenging. The AI behind him anticipates and reacts to your movements and attacks very well. It doesn't help that he has the ability to wipe out your health rather quickly. Sadly, my first encounter with him was not near as epic as the first time I fought a Big Daddy. Strangely, there isn't much reward for killing a Handyman either. Every time I killed one, the only thing I looted from him was health, salts, and cash. I think it would have been nice if they would have at least given me some better equipment. Luckily, there are plenty of other unique enemies in the game that help balance out the Handyman's shortcomings. The game is a decent length, taking between 7 and 12 hours to complete depending on how much exploring the player partakes in. Honestly, I believe that the length is just about perfect. I feel that if it would have been extended any, it might have began to feel dragged out. Luckily though, that didn't happen. This is the first game in a long time where I couldn't put it down. I never once felt bored during my time with it, and as soon as I completed it, all I wanted to do was start it back up and immerse myself back into the world of Columbia and experience everything I missed out on during my first playthrough. Vending machines make a return in this new entry. Vending machines allow for ammo, health, and salts to be purchased, but also allow weapons and vigors to be upgraded. Audio diaries are not the only thing that players can find strewn throughout the game, but also infusions, which can be used to permanently increase health, shield, and salts. On top of that, the player can also find gear that can be equipped to Booker. Each piece of gear adds a unique ability to Booker. For instance, one piece of gear makes it so that after your shield is depleted, the player will automatically move quicker, which helps when needing to make a quick getaway. Bioshock Infinite is above and beyond any expectation I had going in. In my opinion, it is an all-around better game than the first Bioshock. This new entry tells one of the best stories ever told in a video game, and it does it in an interesting way that allows the player to never feel taken out of the game. Infinite has some brilliant plot twists and perhaps one of the most epic endings of all time. Somehow the game manages to tie everything together in a more than satisfactory manner. I completed the game 2 days ago, yet I still find myself mulling over its conclusion, and I believe this story will stick with me for years to come. The game has raised the bar in video game storytelling. Elizabeth is an absolutely brilliant character that is brought to life both in voice and in animation. She is the best companion AI I've ever seen in a game. Combat is fluid, fun, intense, and engaging. Vigors, sky rails, new enemies, and weapon types are all great additions. The game is gorgeous and the world of Columbia bathes in atmosphere. I have no real complaints with this game at all, and any small issue I mentioned in this review was more me just nitpicking at perfection. To be honest though, no game will ever be truly perfect. There will always be a small flaw, texture pop-in, glitch, or graphical hiccup in every game. Bioshock Infinite though, is about as close to perfection as games get. A gem as fine as this game only comes along maybe a few times every console generation. With that in mind, all that's really left to say is, would you kindly buy this game? Bioshock Infinite gets a 10 out of 10.